Okay, so in these efforts that we are always, and that's why we're here, we're always together trying to do in order to enlighten ourselves, obtain more discernment and understanding of the lessons that our beloved older brother and Master Jesus Christ gave it to us. We're going to talk about a topic, but a topic that I see it's intrinsically related to something that we are, or most of us are knowledgeable of, we know about, which is the planetary transition. We all know that planet Earth is on the verge, if it has not already started, to go into a transition. But more than the planet transitioning, moving upwards from a category of planet of trials and tribulations towards a planet of regeneration, we ourselves have to transition. More than the planet, our hearts, our souls, our beings need transition, need reform. So we have been actually invited for this transition, for this inner transition, into this inner reform that we so much hear about time and again. Every time we go to a lecture online, right, with one of the pundits of Spiritism in Brazil, or when we read a book. Of course you can. Only you, Lino.
Just the sound is slow, I think, because of your hearing.
Otherwise I lose my train of thought.
All right.
So it's not going to be a star in a microphone. It's just because it's maybe the Oscars nearby, right? But, well, let me see. Okay, so let's get back into tracks. So we were talking about transition of the planet, and then more than the planet, we are being invited, have been invited to transition, to reform ourselves. That reform that we time and again hear in the Spiritist literature, in the lectures that we hear online, in Brazil, all over the world. If you are a Spiritist, or if you like Spiritism, and if you are a follower of any sort, you have heard about inner reform, inner transformation. So we are invited now to really walk the talk, and it's only our inner transformation that will be conducive of the planetary transition. We typically want change to many things, especially if things are not very good in our lives, right? In all areas. Anything, Lino? Okay, you looked a little anxious. Okay, so we want change, but many times we want change, but we adopt a position of just waiting for that change in a passive way. So for the planetary transition is the same thing, but that goes to all aspects of our lives. If we want change, and if we do not actually do things differently, if we don't embrace some type of change, things are not going to change. So if we are serious about really embracing this invitation for inner reform, we have to adopt changes. We have to make new choices. The planet is changing. We have to change as well, because we cannot ask for change and passively wait if we don't do it. Residents of this planet are the ones that are going to conduct the planet to that transition, to a category of regeneration instead of the trials and tribulations category that we are now. We will be the conductors of that, or not. It is up to us. So to reflect today let me see, on that, we're going to talk a little bit about the narrow gate. But before we go into the narrow gate, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, where it is, who said that, where does it come from, and going back to our inner transformation, we need, as part of that, we need to establish a new north. We need to adjust the compass of our lives a little bit, or a lot. And this is necessary for us to achieve the new objectives that we have, that come along, the individual ones, and that come along in a collective, universal way, which is part of this planetary transition. So, no more lame excuses, no more procrastination, no more idleness, no more delay in our progress, in our doing the things that we have to do to get better at work, to get better at home, to get better here at the Spirit Society, to get better with our partner, with our husband, with our parents, within the family core. It is time for us to do that. We know it's not easy, but that's one of the reasons why we are here, to help us understand, to help us to get the help from one another, to look at our Master Jesus and try to understand even more what he's going to say and what we are going to do right now. So this is what we're going to connect, and that's what we're going to try to connect. This, what we need, one of the lessons that we're going to study today, to help us in that, is going to be the lesson that Jesus brings to us with the narrow gate. And I thought that this was very providential and in line with the planetary transition, and that's why, let me try to use this new technology for me, right, Lino? Okay, with the narrow gate. This is us, this is the gate. But you see, it's not impossible, right? Okay, but before we go and we start looking at Jesus' lesson, which is in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, I'm going to talk just a little bit, just to clarify the term gate. In my research, I noticed that in the US, the term gate is used instead of door, which is used openly and broadly in Brazil. In Brazil, we hear the narrow door, not the gate. I saw here again in the US more the term gate, but gate and door, they are interchangeable. So I may use one or the other throughout our reflection, but that's the same thing. So, okay. So here is what we will find in Matthew. Let me get here. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 to 14. And it's a short one. I don't know if you can read it, but Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for the wide gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it." Now, there's a small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life. And only a few find it and enter through it. Before we start reflecting a little deeper, a little more profoundly, let's go to another episode where Jesus teaches again another lesson using the same term. He uses the term narrow gate. And for information, Jesus said this when he was pronouncing the Sermon of the Mount. That's when, among the most beautiful, sweet, wise, not all the adjectives in the world would describe the Beatitudes, which was what he pronounced on the Sermon on the Mount. This was one of them. Then, he uses technology here. Then in Luke Jesus uses this term again. We will read it together because it's important. I don't think we read the gospel very often, so this is our chance, right? And this was not pronounced during the Sermon on the Mount. This was this was during a time when, during his pilgrimage, Jesus, traveled to many villages in town, and on the way to Jerusalem, he stopped in one, and someone actually asked him. Let's read together. Lord, just a few who will be saved, or just a few will be saved? And Jesus responds to them, strive, make efforts to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able to. Once the head of the house gets up and shuts the door, and you begin to stand outside and knock on the door, saying, Lord, open the door for us, then he will answer and say to you, I do not know where you are from. And then you will say, Lord, we ate and drank with you, and you taught us in the streets. He will reply again, I tell you, I do not know where you're from. You evildoers, go away from me, depart from me. And the passage goes on, and Luke tells us that Jesus continues saying that there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth when you see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, but you will not. You will not be in. You yourselves are thrown out, and they will come from the east and the west and from the north and the south, and will recline at the table in the kingdom of God. And indeed, some are last who will be first, and some are first who will be last. I'd say that a minimum, these are tough words, right? I think that these are indeed tough words. But while we can have an idea, they're tough, but while we have an idea of what these words mean, we need to reconcile the figure, the image of that loving God, infinitely good and just, and us, his children. And it seems that God is telling us that, hey, there is this road which is very narrow and tough and dangerous, and you have to go through it if you want to find happiness or something good. But hey, there is also this narrow, wide, probably attractive road that's easy to go into, but that leads to destruction. So we do need to reconcile a bit that image of the loving God, infinite good and just, with these words. And to help us out, we had to resort to someone not less, not more than Emmanuel. Because this is a tough one we found. So Emmanuel comes to help us. And in the book Harvest of Light, which is this book here, the title is in Portuguese. I'm not sure that there is a version in English. There might be, but I couldn't find it. But I didn't research a lot. But anyway, in the book, in a passage in the book, Harvest of Life, Emmanuel tells us that the obligations, the duties of our lives are our school. And the narrow gate that Jesus referred to in Matthew and in Luke, they're actually the staunch, the firm fidelity with which we have to maintain, to embrace and fulfill our obligations. And with obligations and duties here, we're not only talking about having to be at work on time and do what you're told, or do your homework and present your term paper at school, or even the fidelity that two lovebirds should have with one another, the respect we should grant to our parents, and so many other examples of things that we can easily see and connect with. We're talking about even more than that. We're talking about duties and obligations that we have embraced before we even reincarnate, that were given to us, that we accepted. There are variations as to that, why they are in our lives, why they are our duties, because we either accepted, because they were imposed to us. It depends on how we led our previous lives. But the truth is that we have to fulfill those obligations. And those obligations are not very easy sometimes to fulfill. There might be suffering. There might be some pain. At a minimum, maybe anxiety, apprehension. And that's why the narrow gate is used by Jesus in an allegorical, metaphoric way. The narrow gate that we saw in the very beginning is the gate, it consists of the things that we have to go through in life. There are not maybe the best ones, the choice that we would have to, that we would want to make, but they are there. And we have to go through them. So Emmanuel complements that first teaching, saying that to sustain this fidelity with which we have to embrace our obligations and duties, he admits and he recognizes it's not easy, because it involves, he says, it involves our sacrifice of some, and we just said that, right? Some interests of ours. Interests, they're more immediate. There are earthly interests. We live in this world, it's a planet of trials and tribulations where evil predominates over goodness still, right? There are good in the world, it's not all evil, but there is, that's the case. And that's what we have to face. And our role to make that change during this time where we are all transitioning is something that we have to keep in mind. That in order for us to sustain the fidelity with which we have to accept and fulfill our duties and obligations is the sacrifice in the sanctuary of our heart, and we have to sacrifice all in the sanctuary of our heart that constitutes negative or obscure shadows in the field of our aspirations and our desires. It is not an easy task, but that's actually what Emmanuel tells us to do in the book Harvest of Light. Let's see, where's my 7? Okay. So passing through the narrow door equates, it is the fulfillment, the compliance with our obligations and duties. So at first, it might sound like a simple thing, right? Just fulfill your duties and your obligations, and you will go through the narrow gate. The gate may not even be narrow. But it's been proven time and again for centuries, and here we are to sign off to that it's not an easy task. For centuries, humankind has been challenged to really overcome its vices, its obscurities, its bad, evil inclinations. And we have not succeeded. And the truth is that we will only succeed on this pursuit, which is to change ourselves, to embrace our obligations and duties, when we sublimate, when we suffocate these very vices, these very evil, negative inclinations, materialism, selfishness, jealousy, presumptuousness, pride. Who doesn't have it? Who has not felt it? We have. We do. And these are the things that we have to look into. And the choices that we were talking about in the very beginning, the right choices, that's the north, adjusting the compass, especially at this moment, the verge of transitory planetary transition. That is the time for what we have not been able to succeed, to accomplish in thousands of years of existence. The duties that life imposes us represent a program of learning for us. Yes, they probably, and they do bring suffering, pain. They do. But they are part of the script that we accepted when we came here. So it's part of our program of learning to sublimate all of the issues that we have in our personalities, the moral issues that we have. Our duties, again, is something that the Spirit agreed with before it came here. And the program that is before us is typically arduous. We know that. It's hard because it is contrary to the habits of the old spirit. We may not be very old. You, I'm not talking about me. You may not be very old. You may be young. But now, during this incarnation, we are old spirits. We have come from different avenues of avenues of reincarnations. So the new habits that we need to embrace, the changes, are contrary to the interests and habits and vices of the old spirit that insists in dominating us and prevailing over us and making their wish, their will, and not ours. We now have to really rectify our conceptions, our notions, and we have to start living according to the harmony of cosmic lives. Cosmic lives that you and I here know a little bit more because we come to the Spirit Society. We talk about it. We study the Spiritist book in the first session. Next week we're going to continue. We read books. We have even more responsibility of those that do not know anything. They're not going to be super excused. There's no such a thing as a free pass through the narrow gate. Oh, because I did not know. I didn't go to any Spiritist center. It doesn't matter. It's not Spiritism. Spiritism enlightens us, gives us that plus that some other denominations that are maybe as good. It's not the point. They are spiritual. Anything that, as Lino was explaining during the Spiritist book class that we had, right? It's being spiritual. That's what counts, what goes in our heart. Okay, moving forward. God governs the universe. We just talked about we have to start following the harmony of cosmic life, cosmic laws, laws of the divine providence, laws of God. God governs the universe based on perfect laws. Laws that are full of justice, love, charity, mercy. Laws that aim at our happiness. Happiness, actually, it's not the exception. It's we are the ones that deviate from such laws, causing ourselves not to achieve happiness, be it a moment, be it a lifetime. And then, if God's laws are perfect, then we look, if God's laws are perfect, so why sometimes what happens that we don't follow it? Are they that perfect? What is the problem? Is there a problem? How can it be perfect if it doesn't work? Then again, we have to resort to our masters. And Kardec is also one of our masters, right? A beloved friend that codified the Spiritism principles, doctrine. And then we just talked about natural laws, laws of God, laws of nature, cosmic laws. And they all could be translated as natural laws. And then we ask in the Spirit's book, or Kardec asks the spirituality, what is natural law? Natural law is God's law. It alone ensures the happiness of human beings. It shows them what they should and should not do, and that they only suffer when they deviate from it. I would like, because there is the Spirit's book, in addition to this answer, it has the spirituality that helped Kardec put this together, put the Spirit's book together. And many of the answers, they go beyond just the nitty-gritty answer, right? Such as in this case. It goes on. So I think I copied here. Let's see. No, I didn't. But I would like to read the next question. That is God's law eternal? Like God, it is eternal and unalterable. So God's law, we see that God's laws are perfect. That the issue could never be on the God side. Never. But it's with us. If we don't achieve the pursuit of happiness, which is the objective of God's laws for us, it's because of ourselves. It's because for centuries we have not embraced it. Our earthly interests, our vices, our lack of moral development have delayed us and caused us not to be happy. Let's not say unhappy, but not to be happy. In chapter 18 of the Gospel According to the Spiritism, the title of that chapter is Many Will Be Called, but Few Will Be Chosen. That is actually where those two passages about the narrow gate are reflected there, in that very chapter. And I meant to read the Gospel According to the Spiritism now, and not the Spirit's book. And in item, I think 5, I marked here in my book, I think item 5, the spirits that helped Kardec write that chapter and elaborate on those two well-known gospel passages that we read in the beginning. They say wonderful things about this. They explain to us, they give us some more light on these two gospel passages that I would like to read for us. And it says, the door to perdition is wide because the evil passions are many, and the pathway to evil is frequented by most. The door to salvation is narrow because those who want to go through it must make a great effort to control themselves in order to overcome their evil tendencies. And few resign themselves, few give up deliberately on doing so. It is the complement of the maxim, many are called, but few are chosen. I don't think it gets clearer than that. So, for us, in our evolutionary status, we do understand that the spirituality understand that it is hard. But it is a very viable, possible thing. God's laws are perfect, and nothing is here in vain. It would not be possible for us to have to go through some type of burden if there was not a way to do it. The problem is that we many times, more often than not in fact, side with lame excuses. We side with our interests, material interests, sensual interests, and all other interests that are not spiritual interests, moral interests. That is what's at stake here. So the narrowness of the door represents a small crisis in the evolutionary process of all of our lives, of our individual lives, where we, immortal beings, are being invited to that transcendence that we were talking about. We are invited again to abandon old habits belonging to the most primitive phases of humankind. Habits, primitive sentiments that insist in residing with us. And it is a hard task indeed. But again, it's a very, very doable one. But we need to actively, honestly, incessantly work on it. We need to really want to. The codification teaches us that the worlds of trials and tribulations are characterized by an immense number of inhabitants of that have certain intellectual important achievements, such as Earth, right? How many intellectual achievements have happened throughout the centuries? Especially our last one, the very one. Many, right? Just look around. Artificial intelligence. What else? Non-pollutant cars, recycling. So many, you name it, right? Einstein with his theory of relativity. So many. And, but apart from that, and that is a good thing, because as perfect beings, we are destined to relative perfection in all realms of our lives. Be it intellectual, be it emotional, be it psychological, and among others, moral too. And it's in the moral aspect that we have lagged behind. And that's what we are looking at right now. So far, our achievements have not been very great in the moral arena. We have not. We do not throw, as I used to say, Christians for the beasts to be devoured while we watch. We do not slave people because they have a different color skin. But we still are far behind from what we have to do to change ourselves morally. Then we will ask, if passions, right? And we have not done that because the passions that have come along with us since primitive times. Why do we have passions? If passions are negative and they are the ones that are really driving us to lag behind, so why did God give us passions. Why do we feel passions? And then again, and this is going to be, we're going to wrap up with that because we don't have much more time. But it's going to be something for us to really ponder upon. Passions. So why do we have passions? And in the Spirit's book again, we have the question, as our passions are rooted in nature, are they bad in themselves? And the spirituality responds to us, no. It is only their abuse or access that is bad. The principle of all passions has been given to human beings for their own good. And these passions may bring them to accomplish great things. It is only their abuse that does harm. Because passion, we will see, can bring us to great things. Time and again, we see in the media, we see in the corporate world, passion. And yes, passion can bring us to do great things. But if it gets exacerbated, if it goes beyond the limits, the controls that we should have over our senses, over our vices, it can be definitely harmful to us. How can we define the limit at which passions cease to be good or bad? Passions are like a horse that is positive or useful when under control, but dangerous when untamed. A passion becomes wicked the moment you lose control of it, and it causes harm to yourselves or others. Apologize for the typos and just typos there. So here is something for us to ponder upon, to take away, to think that God's laws are perfect and we are the entire ones at fault and that need to correction. I would like to now read from the book, from the Spirit's book, on the questions relating to passions that extends actually question 908. And the spirituality elaborates by saying, passions are switches that greatly increase your powers and help you carry out God's designs. If you allow yourself to be ruled by your passions instead of controlling them, you become a victim of excess. The same force that can be useful ends up annihilating you. All the passions are rooted in a natural sentiment or want. They are not bad in themselves, since they constitute one of the God-given conditions of our existence. Passion usually signifies the exaggeration of a need or feeling. Every passion that brings human beings closer to an animalistic nature carries them farther away from the spiritual nature. On the contrary, every feeling that raises human beings above the animal nature demonstrates that dominance of their spiritual side over their animal side and material side, and brings them closer to perfection. So we could still be here talking about more and more, but I think that the lesson in the narrow gate, when Jesus uses that metaphor to us, is clear. It cannot never be a God that presents challenges that we were set to fail. That does not exist. Everything is harmonious, is perfect, is good, just, infinitely good, just, and wise in God's world. We are in God's world. We are part of God's work. So it's now time for us to really embrace that, establish changes, set the north to the planetary transition that has to start with our heart transition, soul transition, in order to collectively bring the planet to a vibration, to an energy that can either make it accelerate, we could get it there sooner, we don't know when sooner, but we could, or we could delay it, and we don't want that. So let's think of that. Let's read the Spirit's book. It's a wonderful reading. It's questions and answers, you know. Pick every day 1 or 2, and you're going to love it. And if you can complement with the sweet, wise, beautiful, peaceful lessons of the gospel according to the Spiritism, a little bit, 5 minutes, that's going to make a great difference. And that's going to give the juice, the energy, the support that we need to remind us every day that change, the new choices, have to be serious, active, effective, continuous every day. Thank you.